He stared at the empty room, where laughter once echoed, but now only silence filled the air. Little did he know, the woman standing quietly by the door would be the one to finally break through. In the middle of their growing connection, when Maria and Lucas are finally beginning to trust each other, something breaks. Maria overhears Lucas's father, Theodore, calling him broken, a label Lucas has heard far too many times. Shocked, Maria realizes she's been hiding this truth from Lucas all along, and when Lucas hears it too, he's furious. The walls they've built come crashing down. Is their bond strong enough to survive the betrayal? Maria has spent months caring for Lucas, trying to protect him from the cruel, silent world he's trapped in. But when she overhears his father, Theodore, calling him broken, the truth comes crashing down. Lucas hears it too, and everything changes. With their fragile connection hanging by a thread, Maria must decide if she can tell Lucas the truth before it's too late, or risk losing him forever. Can they heal, or is their bond too fragile to survive? The mansion stood in quiet grandeur, its cold marble floors reflecting the opulent chandeliers above. Yet within it, a silence hung heavy. It wasn't just the absence of sound in the rooms and the high ceilings. It was the quiet of a family torn apart by the invisible divide of deafness. Lucas Montgomery, heir to the vast Montgomery fortune, sat in the center of a room that should have been alive with energy. A painting of his late mother stared down at him from the wall, her face serene, her eyes gentle, but Lucas couldn't hear her voice. He couldn't hear anything. Not his father's booming commands, not the laughter of children in the halls, not the cries of his nurse as she tried, once again, to rouse him from his silent world. At 10 years old, Lucas had long since learned to navigate his deafness alone. His father, Theodore Montgomery, had tried everything, surgeries, therapies, consultants from around the world, yet there was nothing that could reach him. No miracle was forthcoming. Every day, the wealthy family became more distant, their relationship strained by their inability to connect with the silent boy who could never speak his mind. And yet, in his solitude, Lucas had a rare gift. He saw the world with an intensity others couldn't grasp. He studied the way shadows flickered in the evening light. He noticed the way his father's jaw clenched before a meeting, how his stepmother's hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. Lucas could read the room in a way most people never could. He knew their silence better than they did. In the lower floors of the mansion, Maria, the maid, moved with ease, her steps quiet yet purposeful. A woman in her mid-30s, Maria had worked for the Montgomery family for over a decade. She was a fixture in their lives, one they barely noticed. In a household full of riches and expectations, she had learned to remain invisible, to do her job and stay out of the way.
Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin.
Yet Maria's heart held stories that no one had ever asked her to share. She had raised her younger brother, once deaf like Lucas, and understood the unique bond that could form between a family and a child who lived in a world of silence. Unlike the wealthy family, who treated Lucas's deafness as a problem to be fixed, Maria saw it as part of his soul. Her task that afternoon was simple: She had been asked to take the young boy to the garden for a walk. She didn't know that today would be different. Today something would change, something mysterious. Maria stood outside Lucas's door, nervously fiddling with a small, worn object she had carried in her pocket for months. It had been passed down to her through generations in her family, and she had always believed it was meant for someone special. It was an ancient pendant, inscribed with markings she didn't fully understand. She never told anyone about it, thinking it was just a relic, a memory of her past. But as she looked at the little boy in front of her, she knew that this was the moment. The housekeeper opened the door, and Lucas looked up, his deep brown eyes locking with hers, his gaze both weary and curious. He had learned not to expect much from anyone, and yet somehow Maria was different. She smiled softly, hoping to make him feel less alone, less isolated. "Ready for a walk?" Maria signed, her fingers moving fluidly in front of him. Though Lucas couldn't hear the words, he understood them well. He nodded, taking her hand gently as they made their way outside into the vast gardens. Do you believe that sometimes the most unexpected people are the ones who understand us best? Comment below with your thoughts. Could a stranger change your life just by seeing you for who you truly are? The morning sun cast long golden shadows across the garden, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. The moment felt like a pause in time, as if the world had momentarily stopped spinning, holding its breath for something monumental to happen. Maria walked slowly beside Lucas, watching him as he took in the colors of the flowers, the movement of birds above, and the way the wind tugged at the leaves. He had grown up in this garden, but it was a world he could never fully embrace. His silence, the weight of it, isolated him, as if he were a ghost among the living, watching a life he could never fully participate in. Maria noticed how he paused more often than usual, running his fingers over the smooth petals of a rose, his brow furrowed. She wondered if he ever wished to hear the rustling of the wind or the songs of the birds. Maria felt a pang in her chest. She had seen it too many times with her brother. How easy it was for the world to treat deafness like a flaw, a problem to be fixed. Lucas wasn't a problem. But what could she do? As they wandered deeper into the garden, Maria pulled the small, worn pendant from her pocket, her fingers grazing its surface as if it held the answers she was seeking. It had been in her family for generations. Her grandmother had always said it was a key, but never told her what it unlocked. Maria had always kept it close, like a secret she wasn't yet ready to share with the world. She had thought it was just a memory of her heritage, a talisman to keep her connected to her roots. But today, as she watched Lucas move through the garden, something about him seemed to beckon the pendant to come alive. Maria took a deep breath, her heart racing as she felt the weight of the moment. She turned to Lucas, who was examining a particularly large bush of lavender, the soft petals brushing his cheek as he leaned closer. For a long moment she simply stood there, watching him. His expression, usually so reserved and distant, was softer now, vulnerable. He was just a child, after all, a child who hadn't asked for the world to be so quiet. And in that moment, Maria saw him not just as the rich boy, the heir to a fortune, but as someone who needed to be seen, not fixed, just seen. Slowly, carefully, she took Lucas's hand and placed the pendant into his palm. It was warm, the metal smooth against his skin. He looked at her confused, and Maria smiled gently, a tenderness in her eyes. "Hold it," she signed, her fingers graceful in the air. "This is for you." Lucas turned the pendant over in his hands, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. He wasn't sure what it was, but something about it felt important, felt like it belonged to him in a way he couldn't explain. His gaze lingered on the strange markings etched into its surface, and for the first time in a long while, something inside him sparked. There was a sense of recognition, as if the pendant was calling to him. For a moment, everything around them seemed to fade. The wind slowed, the birds fell silent, and even the house felt distant, as if it were no longer part of the world they were in. "Do you feel it?" Maria asked, her voice soft. It was an odd question, one that didn't make sense in any practical way. But it wasn't about the pendant. It was about a feeling, a shift, a change. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he closed his fingers around the pendant, pressing it tightly to his chest. He wasn't sure why, but the gesture felt instinctive, almost protective. Maria's heart swelled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. There was something in the air now, a tension, a sense that this was more than just a quiet walk in the garden. She was about to do something she had never done before, something that could change everything. She had always been careful, always played her part in the background, never wanting to stir up trouble in a family that barely acknowledged her presence. But this felt different. "Lucas," Maria signed slowly, her hand steady despite the racing of her heart.
With a final glance at the pendant, she turned, motioning for him to follow. Together, they walked to the small garden shed at the far end of the yard. It was an old, forgotten place that no one had entered in years. The roof was covered in moss, the windows fogged over with dust, and the door creaked on its hinges when Maria pushed it open. Inside, there were shelves lined with odd trinkets and dusty boxes. But what caught Lucas's attention was a small wooden chest in the corner. Maria walked over to it and knelt, her fingers brushing over the faded wood. She had never opened it before, but today, something inside her urged her to do so. With a soft click, the chest opened, revealing a collection of strange ancient objects, seeds wrapped in cloth, small glass vials, and a delicate parchment with symbols Lucas couldn't read. But in the center of it all was something far more captivating, a set of tiny, intricate glass orbs, each one glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Maria lifted one orb carefully, holding it out to Lucas. Her hands trembled as she did so, but she knew this was the moment. "This is a gift," she signed, her voice barely a whisper. "For you. It's from my family." Lucas took the orb in his hand, his eyes wide with wonder. It was cold to the touch, and as he held it, he could feel something strange, something powerful, pulsing within it. For the first time in his life, Lucas felt as though something might finally break through his silent world. Do you believe in the power of gifts that come when you least expect them? What do you think is about to happen next? Let us know in the comments. Could this orb be the key to changing Lucas's life forever? The days following their time in the garden felt strange to Maria. She couldn't explain it, the way everything had shifted between her and Lucas. It wasn't just the pendant, or the orb, or the strange pull she had felt in the garden. It was something deeper, something unspoken. Maria had always been careful to maintain her distance. She had known her place in the Montgomery house, understood the boundaries set by society, and never crossed them. She was just the maid. She was invisible. She had no right to even dream of being anything more than a background character in the opulent lives of the family she worked for. But the pendant and the orb had changed something. In the days since their brief encounter, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had opened a door she couldn't close. Every time she looked at Lucas, she felt an unspoken connection between them, one that went beyond the walls of silence he lived in, something that felt raw and real, and yet something she knew she shouldn't indulge. In the grand dining room, the clatter of utensils and murmurs of conversation from the Montgomery family seemed to fade into the background as Maria entered with a tray of food. She had noticed how Lucas sat there alone.
His father was engrossed in a conversation with business associates, and his stepmother pretended to be busy with her phone. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him. He was just there, the silent son in a family that didn't know how to reach him. Maria placed the tray of food in front of Lucas with a soft smile. The rest of the room barely acknowledged her presence, but she had learned long ago to ignore their indifference. She glanced at Lucas, catching his gaze for a brief moment. His eyes were distant, but there was something new in them, something softer, more open. Maria's heart ached, but she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the simple task at hand. She had been taught to serve, to not engage, to remain neutral. Yet something about Lucas's vulnerability made her want to stay. It made her want to reach across the invisible chasm between them, but she couldn't. She had to keep her distance. Her position in this house, in their world, demanded it. Lucas, she signed as she placed a fresh glass of water beside his plate. Her fingers trembled slightly as she moved. "Are you feeling all right today?" Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable. His fingers played with the pendant again, as if seeking reassurance, as if the object held some sort of answer to the turmoil inside him. He glanced at her, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak, but stopped himself. For a long moment he said nothing, and then, almost too softly to hear, he signed back, "What's this? Why did you give me this?" Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had thought it would be easier to pretend nothing had changed, but Lucas had seen right through her. "It's just a symbol," Maria signed back, her hands suddenly clumsy. "A gift, a reminder. Nothing more." His eyes lingered on her, searching for more, for something deeper than her words could convey. He didn't understand, not yet, and perhaps, she thought, neither did she. Later that night, after the house had settled into its usual quiet, Maria found herself sitting in the small, dimly lit room where she lived. The pendant and orb were resting on her small wooden desk, their soft glow casting strange shadows against the walls. Maria couldn't help but think of her brother, the one who had been born deaf like Lucas, and how his life had been so different. She had always known there was something powerful about the gifts in her family's past, something that went beyond the ordinary. But could this really change Lucas's life? Could this mysterious orb really break through the silence he had lived with for so long? Maria didn't know, and yet every part of her ached to believe that it could. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing in the hallway, the pendant still clutched in his hand. He was wearing his usual somber expression, but his eyes were filled with something she couldn't read, something she hadn't seen before. I don't understand," he signed, his hands slow and deliberate. "You said it's a gift, but it feels like it's more than that. You're hiding something from me. What is it?" Maria felt a rush of panic. She had been so careful. She had tried so hard to keep everything at arm's length, to not let her emotions get tangled up in this complicated web of silence and unspoken desires. "It's nothing," she replied quickly, her hands betraying her calm words. "Just a family heirloom. There's no need to worry about it." But Lucas wasn't satisfied. His brow furrowed, and he took a small step closer to her, his eyes locked on the pendant in her hands. "I don't believe you," he signed firmly. "You're hiding something. Why did you give this to me?" Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She could lie. She could walk away. She could pretend like nothing had changed. But that would mean denying everything she had started to feel for this boy, this child who was, in many ways, just like her brother, just like the child she had fought for, cared for, loved without reservation. I didn't mean to confuse you," Maria finally said, her voice trembling. "But sometimes things are not as simple as they seem." Lucas took another step forward, his expression softening. "Then what is it?" His hands were gentle now, like a plea for the truth. Maria closed her eyes, fighting the wave of emotions threatening to overtake her. She could lie. She could walk away. She could pretend like nothing had changed. But that would mean denying everything she had started to feel for this boy, this child, who was, in many ways, just like her brother. Just like the child she had fought for, cared for, loved without reservation. I didn't mean to confuse you," Maria finally said, her voice trembling. "But sometimes things are not as simple as they seem." Lucas took another step forward, his expression softening. "Then what is it?" His hands were gentle now, like a plea for the truth. Maria closed her eyes, fighting the wave of emotions threatening to overtake her. She could tell him everything, to explain why she had chosen him. But how could she? How could she explain the impossible? She took a deep breath, and her fingers reached for the pendant again. "I can't tell you everything, Lucas. Not yet. But trust me, there's more to this world than you think." And with that, she turned away, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Lucas standing in the quiet hall, his mind swirling with questions that only deepened the mystery. Do you think the truth should always be shared, even when it's too complicated to explain? What do you think Maria is hiding? Leave a comment below. Could there be a deeper connection between Maria and Lucas that's waiting to be uncovered? The next day, the house felt different. There was a weight in the air, an unspoken tension that neither Maria nor Lucas could shake. After their encounter the night before, Maria had retreated to her usual duties, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. But Lucas had also withdrawn into himself, but there was a subtle shift in his behavior. He seemed more aware of her now, more present. His eyes followed her whenever she entered a room, and he signed questions that lingered in the air, ones that Maria struggled to answer. But then, the unexpected happened. The Montgomery family was preparing for a formal dinner, a lavish event that was to take place later in the week. Maria had been instructed to help organize the preparations, a task she usually handled with minimal fuss. But this time, the instructions came with an unusual addition. Lucas was to attend the event, something that hadn't happened in years. He had always been kept in the background, secluded from the public eye, his silence a reason to keep him away from the social spotlight. But today, something was different. Something had shifted, and Lucas's father, Theodore Montgomery, had decided to include him. "I need you to help him get ready. Make sure he's presentable." The words hit Maria like a jolt of electricity. She had never been tasked with anything like this before. She had always kept to her duties in the background, serving, cleaning, and staying out of the way. But now, she was expected to prepare Lucas for something that was far beyond her reach, beyond her place in this house. At first, she thought she might refuse. She wanted to push back, to retreat back to the safe distance she had always kept. But the look in Lucas's eyes when his father had given the order stayed with her. There was something pleading in them, something that made her heart ache. He wasn't just a child being pushed into a public setting. He was someone searching for a connection, for someone to notice him beyond his silence. Reluctantly, Maria agreed. That evening, as the house grew quiet and the shadows of night began to stretch across the garden, Maria found herself standing in front of Lucas's door. She knocked gently, waiting for him to answer. When the door creaked open, Lucas stood before her, dressed in his usual clothes, a plain shirt and trousers,
his expression unreadable. "Are you ready?" Maria signed softly, her fingers moving slowly through the air. Lucas nodded, his lips tight with uncertainty. He hadn't spoken since their conversation the night before. The mystery of the pendant still hung between them, like a thread they both were too afraid to pull. "Come on," Maria encouraged, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "Let's get you ready." Lucas didn't respond with words, but there was something in the way he followed her down the hall that felt different. He wasn't just a child under her care. He was someone she was starting to understand, someone whose silence called to her in a way she hadn't expected. The room where Lucas was to be dressed was large and opulent, with gilded mirrors and thick velvet curtains. The very air seemed heavy with expectations, a place where beauty and wealth were always on display. But to Maria, it felt like an illusion, a perfect gilded cage. She began to prepare him, choosing the clothes she thought would suit him best. A dark suit with a crisp white shirt, his collar slightly too big for his slender neck. As she worked, she was keenly aware of how close they were, closer than they had ever been before. The physical proximity was unsettling, but it was also oddly comforting. Lucas seemed to feel it too. He was quiet as she adjusted his tie, his hands stiff and unsure. "You're doing fine," Maria signed, gently, trying to break the silence. "You look great. Just relax." He blinked up at her, his lips parted as if he were about to say something. For a moment, his hand brushed hers, a simple gesture, but it felt like 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Something passed through the air, a crack in the walls they had built around themselves. Lucas's eyes lingered on her, and he finally signed, "Why do you care?" The question hit Maria like a punch to the gut. Why did she care? Why did she feel this strange, overwhelming need to protect him, to guide him when the world seemed so determined to shut him out? She opened her mouth to respond, but the answer felt too big, too complicated to explain in a simple sign.
I don't know," she signed slowly, her fingers faltering. "I just want to help. I think you deserve more than this silence." There was a long pause, one that stretched between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Lucas didn't look away this time. His gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, Maria saw something break through the hardness in his eyes. "Maybe you're right," Lucas signed softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I do." But just as quickly as the moment had come, it seemed to slip away. The weight of the house, the expectations, the unspoken rules they both lived by, settled back into place. Lucas stood straighter, pulling his shoulders back as he looked at himself in the mirror. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was the heir to a fortune, a figure to be admired, a presence to be maintained. Maria's heart sank. She had seen the cracks in the surface, the vulnerability that flickered in his eyes, but she couldn't stay. She couldn't let herself fall too deeply into this connection, not when the world around them had so clearly drawn lines she couldn't cross. "I'll wait outside," Maria signed, stepping back. Lucas didn't respond. He simply nodded, his gaze now focused on the reflection before him. As Maria walked toward the door, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. She knew that something was changing between them, but she also knew that it was dangerous to lean too far into it. When she left the room and closed the door softly behind her, she couldn't help but wonder if they would ever be able to fully cross the divide between them, or if they were always going to be just two people stuck in the same house, but worlds apart. Do you think that sometimes the connections we form are the most dangerous because they challenge everything we know? What do you think is holding Maria and Lucas back from fully opening up to each other? Comment below with your thoughts. Can they break through their walls, or is the world around them just too powerful to overcome? The night of the dinner arrived, and with it an air of anticipation that seemed to settle over the entire mansion. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, gilded walls, and elegant gowns wearing designer gowns and tailored suits. It was everything the Montgomery family stood for: wealth, power, and perfection. Yet in the midst of all the luxury and high society, Maria couldn't shake the unease that weighed heavily on her chest. She had dressed Lucas in the finest suit, a perfect image of a young heir who had everything but the one thing he seemed to need most: connection. The moment she helped him into his tuxedo, adjusted his bow tie, and brushed the small wrinkles from his jacket, she had seen him transform into someone unrecognizable, someone who was expected to be everything he wasn't.
As they entered the ballroom together, Lucas seemed to shrink back. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hushed conversations that echoed in the opulent space. He stood at the edge of the crowd, a silent observer, his presence almost invisible in the sea of chatter and movement. Maria, however, was used to the background. She hovered in the periphery, delivering drinks and hors d'oeuvres, always a step behind the world she served. But as the evening wore on, Maria found herself glancing at Lucas. Despite his quiet exterior, there was something raw in his eyes, something searching. He wasn't happy, she knew that much. The luxury and wealth he'd been born into couldn't fill the silence he lived in. It wasn't until later, after the dinner was over and the guests had retreated to their own private corners, that Maria found herself alone with Lucas once again. The music had died down, and the once gleaming ballroom was now shrouded in shadows, its grandeur fading as the night wore on. Lucas stood near the large windows, staring out into the night. He wasn't looking at the view. His eyes were far away, lost in thoughts Maria couldn't even begin to understand. She walked over to him quietly, hesitant but determined. "Lucas?" she signed softly, her fingers unsure in the air. "Are you okay?" He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed outside, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "I don't fit in here," he signed, his hands moving slowly, deliberately. "I don't belong." Maria's heart ached. She had seen it in his eyes tonight, the way he had tried but never quite succeeded in fitting in. The wealth and privilege surrounding him seemed to suffocate him, and she could see how desperately he longed for something real. But it wasn't just the grand ballroom he couldn't navigate. It was everything: the silence, the expectations, the loneliness of a life that had been lived in the shadow of others' dreams. Maria hesitated. She had seen this pain before, but not in this way. She had seen it in her brother, the same helplessness, the same yearning for connection, for understanding. "My brother," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was born deaf, too, just like you." Lucas turned to her, his eyes searching her face. There was something in the way he looked at her, an invitation to share, to open up. She could see he was waiting for her to continue, to reveal more. So she did. "We didn't have much," she signed, her hands steady despite the weight of the words, "but we had each other. When he was born, I didn't understand what it meant to be deaf. I didn't understand why the world felt so loud to everyone else, but so quiet to him. It wasn't until later that I realized the silence wasn't the problem. It was the way everyone else treated him, the way they ignored him or pitied him, like he was broken. But he wasn't." Maria paused, her mind flashing back to the memories of her childhood, growing up in a small, humble home where her brother had always been the center of her world. She had fought to protect him,
to make others see him as he was, whole, intelligent, capable. He wasn't broken. Not then, not now.
I became his voice, Maria continued, her hands now trembling slightly as she signed. I became the one who made sure the world heard him. But it was hard. People didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. They thought he was less than everyone else. Lucas watched her closely, his gaze softening. She saw it now. The same longing in his eyes, the same desire to be heard, to be seen. It's not easy, she added quietly. I know what it's like to fight for someone who doesn't fit into the world they're born into. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, it felt like they were two people sharing the same breath, connected not by words, but by the weight of their shared experience. Maria had never told anyone about her brother in this way. She had never revealed the depth of the pain she felt watching him struggle to find his place in a world that wasn't designed for him. But with Lucas, it felt different. She didn't have to explain. He understood. He saw her just as she saw him. I don't want to be treated like I'm broken, Lucas signed, his fingers slow, deliberate. But they don't understand. Maria stepped closer, her heart aching for him. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. For a moment, the distance between them closed. They were no longer just the maid and the billionaire's son. They were two souls trying to make sense of a world that had always made them feel like outsiders. I know, Maria sighed softly, her eyes locking with his. I know. But just as quickly, the walls began to rise again. Lucas pulled back slightly, his expression shifting, the vulnerability in his eyes fading into a guarded indifference. I'm sorry, he signed, his voice almost a whisper. I shouldn't have said that. Maria blinked, startled by his sudden withdrawal. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was okay, that he wasn't alone. But something held her back. Something kept her from stepping fully into this connection, and she couldn't understand what it was. Lucas, it's okay, she signed, her fingers softening in the air. You don't have to apologize. But he didn't answer. He just turned away from her, his gaze fixed once again on the window, staring out into the night. Do you think the fear of being misunderstood keeps us from connecting with others? What do you think about Lucas and Maria's shared pain? Will this connection help them heal, or are they too different to bridge the gap? Let us know in the comments. Do you think their pasts will bring them closer or tear them apart? The following days felt different for both Maria and Lucas. The dinner had come and gone, but the quiet between them had remained, a lingering presence in every room of the mansion. Lucas was quieter than usual, retreating even further into himself. His father, Theodore, continued to treat him as though he were an accessory, something to be shown off at dinners and business meetings, but never really understood. Maria saw it in the way he looked at his son, the way he sighed with frustration when Lucas didn't conform to his expectations.
But Maria's heart ached for Lucas in a way she couldn't explain. She had never seen him so lost before, so adrift in a world that didn't see him for who he truly was. And it wasn't just his father's indifference. It was the constant, silent battle Lucas fought every day to be seen, to be heard. The loneliness he wore like a shadow was more palpable than ever, and Maria couldn't stand to see him retreat further. One evening, after the last of the staff had left for the night, Maria found herself in the kitchen, finishing up some small tasks. She was about to head to her quarters when she saw Lucas standing in the doorway, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He was staring at the floor, his expression unreadable. "Lucas?" Maria signed gently, her fingers moving slowly through the air. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes darted toward the floor, then back to her, as though deciding whether or not to speak. Finally, he stepped into the room, his feet dragging across the cold tile floor. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore," he signed, his hands moving erratically, as though he were struggling to find the right words. "Everything feels like it's falling apart. My father doesn't even care. He doesn't understand, and neither do you." Maria's breath caught in her throat. The words stung, but she knew they weren't meant to hurt her. They were the words of a child who had been abandoned by those who were supposed to love him, who had been kept at arm's length by the very people who should have protected him. "I'm not like them," Maria signed softly, her hands slow but deliberate. "I'm not like your father. I know what it's like to feel like the world doesn't understand you, to feel like you're invisible, like you're broken." Lucas met her gaze, his eyes wide with something that felt like both shock and hope. He stepped closer to her, his movements tentative, like he was unsure whether to trust her words. But there was a softness in his gaze now, a softness that Maria hadn't seen before. He was beginning to see her, really see her, for the first time. "You're not broken," Maria signed gently, her fingers trembling slightly as she spoke. "And neither are you. No one is broken. You're just different. But different isn't a bad thing." Lucas looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together nervously. "I don't know how to make them see me," he signed. "I don't know how to make anyone see me." Maria moved closer, her hand reaching out to gently rest on his arm. He flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. She could feel the tension in his body, the wariness that had become so familiar to him. But in that moment, Maria understood something she hadn't before. Lucas wasn't just afraid of being unseen. He was terrified of being alone, of being left in the silence that had defined his world. "I see you," Maria signed, her eyes locking with his. "I see you for who you are, not for who they want you to be." Lucas's expression softened, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. There was a quiet understanding between them, one that didn't need words to explain it. It was in the way they looked at each other, in the unspoken recognition of their shared pain, their shared longing for something more. "I wish I could hear you," Lucas signed, his eyes a little sad. "I wish I could hear your voice." Maria's heart ached at his words, but she knew there was nothing she could do to change that. She couldn't give him the gift of sound, but she could give him something else, a connection, a place where silence didn't feel like a prison, but a language they could share. "I don't need you to hear me," Maria signed, her fingers tender and slow. "I just need you to understand. I just need you to know that I'm here." Lucas blinked, the corners of his eyes crinkling, as though he were trying to fight back something he couldn't quite name. Slowly, he reached up and touched the pendant that still hung around his neck, the pendant Maria had given him. It felt like a lifeline, like something that could guide him through the silence that surrounded him. "I don't know what this is," he signed, his fingers brushing over the smooth surface of the pendant. "But when I hold it, it feels like I'm not alone." Maria smiled softly, her fingers moving gently in the air. "It's not just a pendant, Lucas. It's a reminder that you're not alone. You never were." For the first time since she had entered the Montgomery household, Maria felt a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers. She couldn't fix everything. But in this moment, with Lucas standing before her, she knew that maybe, just maybe, They could help each other heal. "I'll be here," Maria signed, her voice barely a whisper. "Whenever you need me, I'll be here." Lucas nodded, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that made Maria's heart swell with an emotion she hadn't expected. A bond had formed between them, fragile but real. And for the first time in his life, Lucas didn't feel so alone. Do you believe that true connection happens when we let ourselves be vulnerable with someone else? What do you think is keeping Maria and Lucas from fully opening up to each other? Do you think they'll be able to overcome their pasts and heal together? Share your thoughts in the comments. The evening felt heavier than usual, the air thick with tension. The mansion was quieter than it had been in weeks, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Lucas had retreated to his room earlier, and Maria found herself wandering the halls, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. She had been working in the kitchen when she overheard snippets of a conversation between Theodore Montgomery and his associates. It was about Lucas, their son, their heir, the one who was supposed to follow in Theodore's footsteps. But it wasn't about his future. It wasn't about his success or the legacy he would leave behind. It was about his silence, his deafness. "She's been wasting time," Theodore's voice echoed in the hallway, sharp and condescending. "She's convinced herself that some pendant or trinket can fix him, but it won't. He's broken. He always will be."
The words stung Maria like a slap. She knew Theodore didn't understand Lucas. She knew he had never cared enough to really see him for who he was. But hearing him speak so coldly, so dismissively of his own son, it hurt in ways she hadn't expected. In the moments that followed, a strange sense of betrayal swept over her. She had been so consumed with protecting Lucas, with trying to bridge the divide between them, that she hadn't realized just how much she was invested in this connection. She had come to care for him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to before, ways that were beginning to feel dangerous. And now, she wasn't sure what to do with those feelings. She knew that Theodore's words weren't meant for her, but they might as well have been. They made her question whether she had done the right thing by getting so close to Lucas, by becoming someone he could rely on, someone who had seen him as more than a silent child in need of fixing. She had tried to protect him, to be the one who truly understood him, but in that moment, she realized that she might be the one causing him more pain by giving him false hope. The house was dark now, save for the faint glow of the chandeliers that illuminated the main hallway. Maria had just returned to the servants' quarters when she saw Lucas standing in the doorway of her room, his figure casting a long shadow on the floor. "Lucas?" she signed quietly, her voice catching in her throat. She had been hoping for a moment of peace, but it seemed that the weight of everything, the conversations, the doubts, the tension, had finally caught up with them. He didn't speak at first. His eyes were hard to read, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. Maria stepped toward him, her heart racing in her chest. She had grown accustomed to the silences between them, the moments of vulnerability they shared, but now it felt as though something had shifted. Something was wrong. "I overheard something," Lucas signed, slowly, his hands trembling just slightly. "Something about me." Maria's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what he was talking about. She had heard Theodore's words too, but she had hoped, no, she had convinced herself that Lucas hadn't, that he wouldn't. But the look in his eyes told her everything. He had heard them. And now,
Everything they had built together was hanging by a thread. I'm sorry, Maria signed, her hands shaking. She had to say something. She had to make this right. It's not true. You're not broken. You're not... You heard it too, Lucas interrupted, his hands moving angrily through the air. You heard what he said. You heard that I'm broken, that I'll never be enough. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had tried so hard to protect him from this kind of pain, to shield him from the world that didn't understand him, that didn't see him as he was. But now, the very person she had been trying to protect was angry with her. He wasn't just angry at Theodore, though. He was angry at her, too. I never meant for you to hear that, Maria signed, her fingers slow and careful. She took a tentative step forward, reaching out to him. But please understand, I never thought of you as broken. Never.
Lucas's expression darkened. Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you protect me from him? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Maria took a step back, the sting of his words sinking deep into her chest. It wasn't that she hadn't wanted to protect him. It was that she hadn't known how to. She had been so focused on trying to fix things, on trying to help him navigate the world that rejected him, that she had ignored the fact that he needed something else, something more than just her protection. I couldn't, Maria began, her voice faltering. I didn't know how to make him understand. I thought if I just helped you, if I just gave you what you needed, it would be enough. Lucas laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the silence between them. It's never enough, is it? He signed, his hands sharp with frustration. No matter how much you try, it's never enough. The words pierced through Maria's heart. The weight of everything, the expectations, the silence, the unspoken truths felt unbearable in that moment. She wanted to reach out, to make things right, but she knew that she couldn't fix everything with just words or gestures. The damage had been done. The bond they had started to form now felt fragile, like a glass that could shatter at any moment. I'm sorry, Maria signed, her hands trembling. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to be the one to make you feel like this. But Lucas didn't respond. He just turned away, walking toward the door, his back to her. The distance between them felt impossible to bridge now. The silence that once connected them now seemed like an insurmountable wall. Before he left, he stopped for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. Maybe you were right, he signed quietly. Maybe it's better if we're just strangers. And with that, he walked out, leaving Maria standing in the empty room, her heart heavy with guilt and loss. Do you think sometimes the people we try to protect end up pushing us away because they're afraid of the truth? Do you believe Lucas and Maria can overcome this rift, or is their connection irreparably broken? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think they can find a way back to each other? The days after Lucas's outburst were heavy, suffocating even. Maria found herself caught in an endless loop of self-doubt, replaying every moment of their conversation over and over in her mind. She had tried to protect him, to shield him from the cruelty of the world that would never understand him. But in doing so, she had neglected the one thing that might have made a difference: honesty. She had hidden the truth from him, and now the distance between them seemed insurmountable. Lucas had barely spoken to her since that night. He kept to himself, locked in his room or wandering the grounds in a daze. Maria's attempts to reach out were met with silence, and each rejection felt like a knife to her heart. The more she tried, the more he withdrew. She couldn't blame him. She had failed him when he needed her most. She knew the walls between them were her doing. She had built them out of fear. Fear that if she exposed her own vulnerability, if she allowed him to see the full extent of her feelings, it would only push him away. But now she realized that the silence between them was suffocating. They were both trapped in their own worlds, worlds that were too lonely, too quiet to navigate alone. One evening, as the mansion settled into its familiar hush, Maria found herself standing outside Lucas's door. The moonlight cast soft shadows on the hallway, and the air was cool against her skin. She hadn't seen him all day, and the absence of his presence was unsettling. She knew she couldn't keep waiting for him to come to her. She needed to take the first step. With a deep breath, Maria knocked gently on his door. There was no response, only the faint sound of rustling inside. She knocked again, this time a little louder, her heart pounding in her chest. "Lucas?" She signed quietly, her fingers trembling slightly as they moved through the air. "Please, let me in." For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, finally, the door creaked open, revealing Lucas standing in the dimly lit room. His expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed with something Maria couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," Maria signed softly, her heart in her throat. "I shouldn't have hidden things from you. I never meant to hurt you." Lucas didn't respond immediately. He stood in the doorway, his hands at his sides, his posture stiff and guarded. He wasn't angry, but there was a sadness in his eyes that made Maria's heart ache. "I overheard what you said," Lucas signed slowly, his hands steady despite the weight of his words. "But I didn't expect you to be the one who kept things from me. I thought you were different. I thought you really saw me. But now I'm not sure anymore." Maria's breath caught in her throat. "I do see you," she signed quickly, her fingers desperate. "I see you, Lucas, but I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd hate me for it. I didn't want to lose you." Lucas shook his head, his face softening. "But we've already lost each other, haven't we? We're both too afraid to let go of the past. We're too afraid to trust what we feel." Maria stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence between them was thick now, heavy with unspoken words and unshed tears. It felt as though the world had come to a standstill, as though the moment they were in could change everything, but only if they were brave enough to take the next step. "I don't know how to fix this," Maria signed, her fingers slow and uncertain. "I don't know how to make it right." Lucas's eyes softened, and for a brief moment it felt as though he was truly seeing her. The vulnerability, the fear, the longing, everything they had shared in the past few weeks came crashing down on them. He stepped closer to her, his eyes locked on hers. "You don't have to fix it," Lucas signed gently, his hands steady now. "You just have to be here, with me. That's all I need." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in days, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. She hadn't realized it before, but Lucas wasn't asking for perfection. He wasn't asking for her to have all the answers. He was asking for something simpler, something more profound. Her presence. "I can do that," Maria signed, her hands trembling with the weight of what she was about to say. "I can be here, for you, no matter what." A small smile tugged at the corners of Lucas's lips, and Maria felt something shift inside her. The tension, the fear, the walls that had kept them apart, they began to crumble piece by piece. In that moment, she realized that she wasn't the only one who had been afraid. Lucas had been scared too, scared that if he opened up, if he let himself be seen, he would lose everything. But now, as they stood in the quiet of his room, there was no more fear. There was only trust. There was only the understanding that they didn't need to be fixed, that they didn't need to have all the answers. They only needed each other. Lucas reached out slowly, his hand brushing against Maria's. She took it gently, feeling the warmth of his skin, the connection they had both been so afraid to acknowledge.
She had thought that silence was what separated them, but now she understood that silence was what had brought them together. They didn't need words to understand each other. They had always understood. Do you think that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to simply be present for someone even when you don't have all the answers? Do you think Lucas and Maria will be able to truly heal from their pasts? What do you think their future holds now that they've opened up to each other? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe they can rebuild their bond? The days that followed Lucas and Maria's conversation in his room were different. The tension that had once suffocated the air seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a fragile but undeniable sense of peace. They had crossed a threshold, one that neither of them had expected to find so soon, yet they both knew it was the right path. Lucas began to open up to Maria in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't immediate. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when old habits pulled him back into his shell. But slowly, carefully, he started to trust her again. Their conversations were no longer filled with awkward silences or unfinished thoughts. They spoke, and in those exchanges they began to understand each other in a way that was impossible before. Maria, too, found herself shedding the weight of her own fears. She had worried that being too close to Lucas would hurt him, but now she realized that closeness was exactly what he needed. She no longer felt like the outsider in the Montgomery household. She was no longer the maid, and he was no longer just the son of the wealthy family. They were two people, vulnerable and whole, trying to navigate a world that didn't always make sense.
One evening, as the sun began to set over the sprawling estate, Maria stood by the garden, watching the sky turn shades of pink and purple. She felt the strange sense of calm wash over her. There was no grand, sweeping gesture or dramatic moment. It was just the quiet realization that things were different, better, even. She had learned to let go of the burden of perfection. She didn't have to fix everything. She didn't have to make things right all the time. All she had to do was be there, for Lucas, for herself, for the life they were building together. As she stood lost in thought, she heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Lucas walking toward her, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his expression relaxed for the first time in a long while. He looked different, less burdened, more open. He didn't look like the child who had been trapped in silence, but like someone who was finally learning how to speak his own truth. He stopped a few feet from her, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't say anything at first, but there was a softness in his gaze, something that spoke volumes. "I've been thinking," Lucas signed, his hands slow and steady. "I don't think I've ever really thanked you for being there, for seeing me." Maria smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't need to thank me," she signed softly. "I see you because you're not invisible. You never were." Lucas nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I don't feel invisible anymore. Not with you." The words hung in the air between them, warm and genuine. They didn't need to say anything else. The connection they shared was enough. It was more than enough. Maria stepped closer, her hand reaching out to rest gently on Lucas's arm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The silence between them felt different now. Comfortable, intimate, a silence they could share without fear or shame. "You don't have to be perfect," Maria signed, "and neither do I. We can just be. Together." Lucas's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. It was as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders.
For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to fit into someone else's mold. He wasn't trying to be the son that Theodore wanted or the boy who had to be fixed. He was just Lucas, quiet, strong, and real. As the evening darkened, the two of them walked through the garden side by side, the sound of their footsteps blending with the rustle of the leaves in the breeze. It was a simple walk, a simple moment, but it was one that held more meaning than either of them could have expressed in words. In the distance, the mansion loomed large, a reminder of the world they had both been a part of, but not a world that defined them. They had found their own path, one where they didn't need to fit into the expectations of others. Their bond wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, and at times painful, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Later that night, as Maria was preparing to leave the grounds for her quarters, she found Theodore in the hallway, looking out over the estate with his usual air of detachment. The conversation she had overheard weeks ago, his cold dismissal of Lucas, his unwillingness to understand, still lingered in her mind. But tonight, it didn't hurt as much. "Maria," Theodore said, glancing over at her as she passed, "is everything all right with Lucas?" Maria hesitated, her fingers poised to sign, but for the first time, she didn't feel the need to explain. "He's doing fine," she signed simply, her voice calm but firm. "He's learning to be himself." The words surprised her as much as they might have surprised Theodore. She had never said anything like that before. She had never asserted Lucas's right to be who he was, to exist without apology, to live without someone else's expectations. But tonight, it felt right. Theodore said nothing. He simply nodded, his gaze turning back to the mansion in front of him. As Maria walked away, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. She wasn't the same person who had first stepped into the Montgomery house. Neither was Lucas. They had found something together, something that didn't need to be explained or defended. It was simply the truth, and it was enough. When Maria finally reached her room, she sat down on her small bed, the weight of the day lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace. She had made her choice, and Lucas had made his, and together they had chosen each other. Do you think that true growth comes when we allow ourselves to embrace vulnerability rather than hide from it? What do you think is next for Maria and Lucas now that they've found each other in the truest sense? How do you think their future will unfold? Share your thoughts below. Do you believe they'll continue to heal together? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as I can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.